What I want to do today, before we get into our general discussion of the entire subject matter that we've covered here during the 20 lectures and 9 previous discussion groups that we've had, I want to emphasize the fact that what we've been talking about here in this course, where on the one hand it might be viewed as a lot of bad news to find out that the administrations of the various executive branch offices, with full knowledge for the most part of the Congress, has been engaged virtually since the beginning. And I want to touch a little bit upon this, the earliest stages of this. You know, in having a secret concealed group behind the scenes that basically is really determining the policies, both domestic and foreign policies of the United States government. But the fact of the matter is that the worst that you can say about it, or the most accurate thing to say about finding out all this information, is that it is disillusioning. And that is literally true. It is disillusioning. And that is only because we have been previously illusioned into believing that the kind of simplistic presentation that is made to us as high school students, and surprisingly even as college students, and to some great extent even as graduate students, there's a rather simplified story that is presented to us as Americans as to what our history has been and as to how the decisions are made by our governing circles to determine our domestic and foreign policy. It turns out that right from the very beginning, the original Secretary of the Treasury of our United States government under George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, in fact, was, despite the fact that he participated in the Revolution against the British Crown in the colonies, that as of 1776, he was the Chief of Staff for George Washington, who was the commanding officer of all of the revolutionary forces. And he was the secretary and chief of staff, or aide-de-camp, for George Washington. And George Washington was so impressed by him that George Washington made him the Secretary of the Treasury in the very first American administration. And Alexander Hamilton was actually quite an extraordinary person. And you can see, in a sense, from his life, why it is that he might have thought that those who worked the hardest and were the most intelligent and were the most gifted with having developed relationships with wealthy and powerful people ought to be the ones who made the decisions on behalf of a nation state. But because he was a young fellow born out of wedlock in the islands in the Caribbean, and basically worked his way all the way on up through the system to end up getting to go to Columbia University, and then graduated from law school, and made his way into the upper ranks of the elite in North America. He thoroughly respected, however, the basic banking system and economic system that had been developed in England. And he just wanted to have the colonies here in North America be able to function independently from that particular country and have their own economic system very similar to theirs. And he was constantly admonishing those that were engaged in the revolution not to allow the revolution to descend into what he considered to be anarchy and a disrespect for authority. And he implemented a series of policies in his position as the Secretary of Treasury, the original one, where he basically got the United States government in the first administration to accept a central bank that was basically backed by the rich and powerful, to be able to provide a centralized economic system in the country of finances and money and currency. And he then continued to ply his trade as a lawyer on behalf of some of the most wealthy families in the United States at the time. He married into the Schuyler family, which was a very wealthy financial family in the colonies. And he had as his clients, among others, Irénée DuPont de Nemours, the major producer of gunpowder in the United States, and generated the DuPont Chemical Corporation that ended up having some 60,000 employees and had a net worth of $2 billion. This was one of his clients. He represented people that were in the mercantile class and in the financial class and the bank owners. And he was constantly advocating on their behalf in the halls of power from the very beginning. And if you track his history, and there are several books about Alexander Hamilton. In fact, peculiar enough, there's a brand new Broadway musical called Alexander Hamilton. And they've played upon this kind of romantic life that he ended up having, all the way up to ending with his being killed in a duel, as you may know, by Aaron Burr, because Alexander Hamilton had intervened in the election of 1800 when Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied in the Electoral College. And remember that it was Alexander Hamilton who had advocated that the population not be allowed to vote directly for the President of the United States. The legislatures, the state legislatures chose their electors to go to the convention, not the people. And the legislators, a condition preceding for being able to be a member of the state legislatures was that you had to be a white property owner, male property owner. And so that there was this elite attitude about who it was that was going to be governing the country right from the very beginning, which was largely the product of the efforts of Alexander Hamilton in his helping to craft the American Constitution, opposing proposals that had been made by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and others, that there be more of an egalitarian, direct democratic selection of the members of Congress in the United States Senate and the President. Alexander Hamilton prevailed upon them and ended up winning the debate, thereby not allowing direct selection of these major officers, the President of the United States or the members of the Senate. So that what I wanted to emphasize here in the final class is that it's extremely important that you understand that even though you have been surprised and disillusioned to learn a lot of what it is that you have learned here in these 20 lectures, that you should not feel bad about being disillusioned. Because as I said, the alternative to being disillusioned with regard to these things is to continue to be illusioned and to continue to believe the sort of simplistic, pre-sophomoric positions on how the government of the United States is run, who runs it, and toward what objectives it is run, or at least has been run up until the coming to adulthood of you guys. Because now you have an opportunity, as our generation had, the baby boomer generation, to take a stand to try to amend this particular system. So that is the reason that I've been sharing this information with you over these 20 lectures, so that you could know what the real governing power is behind the scenes, so you could learn how to deal with this. So that is the major purpose of the course. And so I want you to be able to remember that the old Irish aphorism that I shared with you is that, well, the old sod, it isn't what it used to be, but then it never was. And so that we have to take this governing system as we find it and move it toward a fuller and fuller fleshing out of the promises that were implied in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, in the natural law theory that undergirded the founding of the Constitution. That is your task. Now, what I've done is I've suggested that for at least 99% of you, in doing your final thesis for the course, the 15 to 20 page mini thesis that you're going to be doing, I've asked you to try to conceive of yourself as being in the office, in an office of the president-elect here in the 2016 election, assuming that it's not going to be Donald Trump, at which point, you wouldn't know what to write as to, what you might recommend for him to do, because he wouldn't know exactly what he wanted to do until he gets there. And so assuming he's not going to be the president, and assuming that it's a 95% probability that it's going to be Hillary Clinton, I recommended that you picture yourself in the administration of Hillary Clinton, and as she is interviewing you for a position that is the highest position in the federal administration that would be consistent with what your particular career goals are, and that what you would do to advise her as to the existence of this historical cabal that has resided behind the scenes in the power structure of the United States government, assuming that she didn't know about it already. Now that may be somewhat more than somewhat of a fiction, but it provides a way for you to set forth your understanding of what it is that you've learned in this course in the context of your making a specific concrete set of recommendations to the president-elect as to what she, in this case, in the far out possibility that it were Bernie Sanders, for a couple of you that just could not bring yourself to conceive of being in an administration for Hillary Clinton, I gave you the liberty to assume, for the sake of the argument, that Bernie Sanders was elected, and you were going to be making a proposal to him, or more realistically to her, as to what type of a full-scale program you would like to see implemented under your authority as a person in this position in her administration that is at the height of your professional ambitions. That you, in the context of which you'd like to advise her as to the existence of this cabal, explain how this cabal might try to array itself to oppose this program that you're proposing, and explain what steps you think that she should take, or potentially Bernie Sanders should take, to try to overcome this problem. Now, all of that is predicated upon the assumption that you would want him or her to do something to overcome the power and influence of this particular cabal. So what I want to do is I want to discuss with you today what you think some of the positive as well as negative consequences have been of having this particular group in power. Because one of the things that Thomas Jefferson recognized when he became president, he recognized that it wasn't really possible for the kind of agrarian, rural, localized kind of political groups that were in the United States at its origins. They were not really capable of engaging in war without generating major debts. And that because of the major debt that had been generated by the Revolutionary War and later by the War of 1812, that they found themselves in debt. That they were about an $11.7 million debt that the government had for funds that it had borrowed from France and other European powers to fight the Revolutionary War and then to fight the War of 1812. Now, all of this, of course, assumes that for any reason you might think it's a good idea to fight a war. And that may differentiate most of us here from them. But I don't think that I assume that we think that it was an appropriate thing to do for the colonists to withdraw from beneath the authority and power of King George and the British Crown. I think that virtually all of us, even though we've been propagandized into believing that it was a good idea, end up independently thinking that it was probably a good idea to do that. As to whether or not you thought they should have resorted to the use of ad hominem violence against the soldiers and stuff of the British Crown is a separate question. There's another ancillary question as to whether or not they could have conceivably thrown off the so-called yoke of tyranny, short of having resorted to the use of ad hominem violence. I would tend to personally be an advocate of the utilization of non-ad hominem violence in the effort to throw them off. And I, again, refer you to, just for your future edification, the 3-volume work that was written by Gene Sharp. He was the editor of these 3 volumes at Harvard University on the application of the principles of collective nonviolence against occupying powers. And this could serve as a little mini Bible for you in the future if you're trying to figure out how it might be necessary to resist and to combat tyrannical forces if you come to experience the gathering of a tyrannical power here in the United States in the face of the global climate change, which we've discussed from the very first lecture, which is what you're getting ready to be confronted by. And there is no doubt in my mind that the United States Defense Department and Pentagon, as well as Central Intelligence Agency and other defense agencies, are very much involved in determining what type of radical measures they are going to be taking to try to, quote, maintain order, which means to maintain the people that are in positions of power and authority now in power, even in the face of the substantial disruption that they anticipate in the face of the consequences of global climate change. So all of that having been said, the challenge that the Founding Fathers were confronted by as of 1812, just 20 short years or so after the founding of the country, is they were confronted with this massive debt that they had to figure out how to handle. And so what they did is, early on, pursuant to the recommendations of Alexander Hamilton, they established a federal bank, a United States bank. And what they did is they established a set of policies that would capitalize that bank. And in doing so, they formed a partnership put together by Alexander Hamilton with the wealthy class in the United States, virtually all of whom had been Tories, who had actually opposed the revolution. But once the revolution was successful, they decided to accommodate it, and as long as they could get back into a position of power in the country. And so these people were involved in capitalizing loans in financial structures and arguing on behalf of such things as common systems of weight and measures throughout all the states, and began to get the government under the Secretary of Treasury to do things like to give loans out of the federal bank to businesses, so that the businesses could establish jobs, employment, manufacturing, later subsidizing building canals, for example, the Panama Canal, and the Erie Canal, and others. That they used major amounts of government monies that had been generated by imposing tariffs on foreign imports, and interestingly enough, very importantly, a major tax on whiskey, which they thought was pretty much an open demand in the countryside, and so that they were getting income. They had no income tax until 1913, so that they used this for generating funds. And so the elite financial class was, at the one hand, giving money over into the system so that it could be lent out for building other industry in canals, in government subsidies, etc. So they were in the extraordinary position of they lend money to the federal government. The federal government then spends the money to build a canal or a railroad or other types of infrastructure, which benefits the companies and the private entrepreneurs, and that they gain the value of it, and they also have the money owed back to them from the government with interest. And so that you'll see that something very similar was set up at the beginning by Alexander Hamilton to what we later saw Allen Dulles do at the end of World War I by imposing reparations or war debts that were owed by the German government, and then brokering the loans from his clients at Brown Brothers Harriman to give the loans to Germany to pay back the war debts that were owed to other clients of Brown Brothers Harriman. And then the Brown Brothers Harriman lending clients had the principal coming back to them from Germany plus interest. And that this was a system that was set up by a lawyer, in that case Allen Dulles, or his brother John Foster Dulles, both lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell. But Alexander Hamilton was the template for this. Alexander Hamilton, as the attorney for a lot of these wealthy families, such as the DuPonts and others, and the Schuyler's, actually crafted a system by means of which they were able to apply their power and influence through their control of the financial system to gain power over the policies of the country. And this actually enabled them to build militaries and navies, build ships to then protect the merchants that were on the high seas, and so that the merchants on the high seas had their ships protected buy money that was paid out by the federal government so they could ply their trade in the world of commerce. And so that this symbiotic relationship has existed inside the United States between the government policies and government expenditures, and in a certain sense subsidizing a lot of the costs that would have been necessary for the businesses themselves to finance if the government were not doing it. And then we saw, as we went through the course, that there was this series of events that occurred very shortly after the American Civil War, in which this unique economic model of the corporation, the shareholder-owned business corporation, actually caused the catapulting of this power into a complete state of ascendancy in the country, whereby they were able to sit on each other's boards of directors, still remain completely immunized against any personal legal liability, able to garner unto themselves the profits from this type of a corporation, and to wield their power and influence over the government through giving money to the candidates to run for office and get them to continue to fulfill their needs. And then they basically were providing jobs in commerce, in economic stimulus and stuff to the entire economy, which then trickled down to the benefit of others. Now, it didn't trickle down very far. It didn't get all the way down into the working class. And there were slaves, and that there were people that were basically indentured servants working for this economic system. But that tended to generate the rise of what we pointed out, which is another major feature of this course, is this whole movement of the Chautauqua movement that was generated between 1874 and came into sort of full fruition later as it approached the 1890s. This whole Chautauqua movement is what generated a completely countervailing ethos. And it was rooted in what they understood to be what they call spiritual values. And these were the values that were asserting that it was morally inappropriate to have small 6- and 7-year-old children working 12-hour days, 7 days a week in the mines. That it was unethical to have young women basically chained to their chairs, basically in these textile mills, in sewing mills, where they weren't even allowed. They were only allowed to go to the bathroom once a day. You know, I mean, these horrible working conditions that these robber barons imposed upon everyone. We saw that a full-scale movement arose in the United States, but it didn't just arise in the passive voice. It was actually generated by the National Board of Homeland Ministry of the United Methodist Church. It actually rose up against the robber barons, and that they were in their ascendancy as of 1917, when the Bolsheviks overthrew Tsar Nicholas II and established the worldwide secular, atheistic, communist, socialist regime. And that basically sucked the oxygen out of the entire Chautauqua movement. It sort of flattened out and became sort of an entertainment system. And what I've been proposing in this class is that, confronted as we are with the renewal of the robber barons, upon the departing from the field of competition with the nation-state-based Caucasian male capitalist class, that with the departing from the field of struggle against them by the Soviet Union on December 31st of 1991, we saw in the course them snap right back in that initial set of meetings in the West Wing in the first week of January of 1992, in the formation of the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document, the open advocacy, even though it was top secret, but it was openly calling for the establishment of full spectrum dominance on the part of the United States military throughout the world. And they were crassly stating that the purpose of this entire operation was to maintain the continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials that were needed by what they call the northern industrial states, indicating that it was for industry and for the commercial enterprises that run the governments. Now, this is the laying out of the general material that we've covered here in the course. And what we really need to confront here is the question as to whether or not you or I or any of us as citizens, is there a significant majority of the people of the United States that are willing to forego some of the advantages that have been generated by the existence of this partnership between commerce and finance and banking and the military and the two major political parties. That, as I said, we find ourselves, living in an economic state, a cultural state that is superior to that which was enjoyed by kings and queens in the medieval period. We have access to foodstuffs and products from all around the world. We have access to adequate jobs, many of us. We have access to education, training, and the fact of the matter is, but for the intervention of the consequences of global climate change, you would have every reason in this class, you would have every reason to anticipate that you could spend the remainder of your 80 years or more living a fairly comfortable life, being able to pursue a vocation of your own choice, have every reason to believe that you'd be generating an adequate income to have your children, to mate and have children, and have your home and your lifestyle preserved. But, as it turns out, the consequences of the global climate change are just about upon you. As we gather here for our final class today, you see the entire states, the southern states, being inundated basically with massive floodwaters. You turn on the news, and as soon as they get done talking about what Trump's latest tweet was, they start showing you the consequences of global climate change. That you have massive flooding, you have tornadoes. They have tornadoes in South Carolina, in North Carolina now, for the first time ever. And they have the normal tornadoes going on in the spring and early summer in Oklahoma, only they're like 10 times worse than they've ever been. And you have temperatures now. You have temperatures now of 118 to 120 degrees in Arizona and New Mexico. We've just gotten through some portion of the worst drought in the state of California in recorded memory. And the year 2016 is already breaking the record as the hottest year on record, which was established in 2015. And had previously been beating the record of 2014. And so we see this happening now. We see the ice melting throughout the entire polar caps now. And people are now beginning to understand that there are consequences to this. And no matter how many times people have been telling people about this and that it was going to be happening, nobody seemed to be very interested in doing much about it, figuring that they could put it off and put it off and put it off. Sort of like your final paper. Until it finally dawns on you that, we've got to get this thing done. Okay? And so that's what's happening now. And what I want you to do is I want you to be able to remember when you move on from this course, whether you're going on to graduate school or whether you have 1 or 2 or 3 more years left of your college education, I want you to remember this course when you see the consequences of global climate change descending upon you more and more. Because the fact of the matter is, this is going to be a lot more than just watching the news each evening and seeing different parts of the country get flooded out or get hit with tornadoes or a hailstorm the size of golf balls or baseballs. The fact of the matter is, it is going to massively disrupt your personal life, even though you don't think so at the present time. You just don't think so. It's going to happen to other people perhaps. There may be some degree of discomfiture that you get subjected to, but that it's not going to substantially disrupt or alter your life. I'm here to tell you that that is incorrect on your part. That this is going to happen just as sure as the fact that you're going to have children and that you're going to have grandchildren. And that most of you sit here today, it's kind of a far removed idea from you, but you kind of realize that's going to happen someday. But the fact is that this is as certain as that. You know, that you're going to have your life massively disrupted, and your children are going to face even worse. Okay? So that we still are in the 2 generations, and I say 2 generations because I don't really place a lot of faith in members of the X generation to do an awful lot about this, because they've been basically trained by the civic generation, the World War II generation, to just try to get as much as they can possibly get in the short run here before all this starts to happen. Whereas your generation and mine are both dedicated as the civic generation of this century and as the idealist generation of this century to trying to work together to form a partnership to be able to address this critical, clear and present danger that is confronting you and will confront your children. As I say, right now, it's probably impossible to avoid some 20% of the worst possible consequences that we aren't going to be able to do anything but figure out how to cope with those and get around those. But there's an accelerating set of consequences that are coming upon you. That, you know, the fact that the Obama administration has been willing to do nothing more than propose legislation that would reduce the generation of global greenhouse gas emissions by 33% by the year 2035, which they don't even conceive of being able to get past the House of Representatives. But that's the most that they're willing to propose. And you're going to see Hillary Clinton come into her new administration, and she's going to be basically just reiterating a lot of those same basic positions. As dramatic a set of medical services that she's going to be recommending are going to be nothing more than a little bit more emphasis on Obamacare. She's not going to go along with any of the proposals to have a universal Medicare for everybody, which is all they would have to do is have everybody be able to get on Medicare. The entire system is set up, the computers are all in place. They're perfectly capable of doing that. They would reduce by billions of dollars a year the amount of monies flowing out to these private insurance companies, health insurance companies. They would save millions and millions of dollars of administration on these things, and they could put it all into one system, but she's not going to do that. Okay? And she's, in the same way, she's not going to radically suggest different steps to be taken to deal with global climate change. And not the least of which reason is that she's received over $15 million in her campaign contributions from the petrochemical industry, the petroleum industry, the insurance corporations, etc. This is just like, you know, dog bites man. You know, this is not a surprising news story. to anyone. And so that you're going to have to, coming, right, some of you just coming out of your undergraduate studies or rising into the higher levels of your undergraduate studies are going to be confronted now with this administration, basically as the first full-scale administration that you're going to see in operation throughout your entire lives. That you were young enough at the beginning of the Obama administration. I mean, many of you were only like 12 years old or something like that. But now you're full-grown adults. This is going to be the first administration that you really experience as full-fledged adults, that you're responsible for allowing to come into power because of your not having worked harder for Bernie Sanders, right? I mean, that just flat out, okay? And so that you're going to have to start to live with the consequences of this, and which means that you're going to have to start thinking in terms of what happens in 2020. You know, what is it you're going to do in 2020 as you watch the policies of Hillary Clinton during her first term from 2016 to 2020. When you watch her policies basically mimic those of Barack Obama, and not really propose anything more than she thinks she might be able to get the Republican-controlled House of Representatives to go along with. You know, not try to use the presidency as the bully pulpit to push through major fundamental changes, as Bernie Sanders would try to do. You're going to see her trying to accommodate not only the Republicans in the House of Representatives, you're going to see her accommodating the insurance companies, accommodating the petroleum industry, accommodating, you know, all of the other major corporations that have given funding to her campaigns, and so that she's perfectly willing to accommodate them, even though they're insisting upon policies that are going to destroy the climate of the world. Okay? And you have to decide what it is you're going to do about that. Okay? And what I'm suggesting is that you should, based upon what in part you've learned here in this course during the course of 20 lectures we've had, in 10 full discussions, you need to decide what it is that you're going to do between now and 2012 to determine whether or not you're going to try to participate in lifting up representatives of a different worldview, or you're going to become representatives of a different worldview, and that you're going to be offering yourself for public office to oppose these positions, to actually set forth affirmative alternative positions and start to lay them out. That's why I've asked you in this final thesis of yours to try to engage in the exercise of thinking about what it is that you would propose. If you reach the highest levels of your presently planned profession, and you find yourself in a position inside the administration to be able to propose some set of policies that you would have jurisdiction over, whether it ranges all the way from the Assistant Secretary of Housing to the head of the DEA, if that's, or that you're in an intelligence agency in proposing things to be done, or a teacher somewhere, or a business person. What is it that you're going to be doing to try to change these policies? So that's the purpose of this course. I guess it's a little more action oriented or than other courses that you might take, that are just kind of, looking through history and saying, isn't that interesting? Now I know a certain something about history that I didn't know before. The reason why I'm sharing this particular information with you out of history is so you will know what the challenges that you're confronted by and what it is that's causing the global climate change. You're not going to just fall for it and say, oh, well, what's really causing the global climate change is all of your consumerism. That's what they're going to try to get away with. And to the extent to which you know that you spend a fair amount of your time, consuming certain things that are clearly not necessary, You spend time shopping and getting extra things you don't need. You know all that. But do not let these people hoodwink you into believing that you're the proximate cause of this global climate change. It's not your demand for all of these superfluous products that they're producing. As Francis pointed out in the papal encyclicality issue, this is the consequence of a major marketing campaign that is being generated by the transnational corporations to specifically hoodwink you into believing that you have to have these products. Because in fact it's a display of your worth. So that those of you who are planning to go on to become professional philosophers, that you have to deal with this issue of postmodernism. I would recommend a book to you on that. A very, very interesting book, actually. It's well worth your while having it on your shelf, even if you don't get a chance to read it right away. I'd recommend it for your summer reading, if you're at the beach somewhere. But it's Houston Smith's book. It's called Beyond the Postmodern Mind. There are a few chapters in there that you might not waste your time reading through, because they're extraordinarily kind of intricate discussions of various philosophers and their differences of opinion. But it's an excellent book talking about the postmodern mind and the postmodern philosophy, which is basically asserting that because of the lack of absolute clarity with regard to the answer to these pillar questions that we talked about in one of our lectures, this question of how the universe came into being, or how the universe is unfolding teleologically, is it unfolding towards some predictable end? The ontological question as to how did consciousness come into being? What is it that generates an ontological entity that is entitled to being recognized as a separate entity from all the rest of inchoate reality? And the epistemological question as to what the means are that we have at our disposal as human beings, by means of which we can answer questions like that. That just because we do not have at the present time definitive, ultimate answers to those four pillar questions, does not mean that we are exempt from having to make moral choices. And I do not believe, and in case you haven't gotten it yet in this course with me, is I don't believe that we are just thrown upon the sea of aimless relativism to basically choose the option that generates the immediate short-term gratification to us, or even to our limited extended family. That you have moral obligations that transcend those, and that I believe that you have now borne witness to the activity of sort of the authoritarian first worldview, the kind of first worldview, right systematist authoritarians, the fascists. The fascists have confronted our world with this kind of authoritarian worldview. They disguise themselves as second paradigm dialecticians by pretending that the communists are the real problem here. But in fact, they're first paradigm, authoritarians who believe that they're entitled to rule everything and to own everything and have as much as they want, and that whatever a little bit trickles down to others, that's okay. But if it doesn't trickle down all the way to the bottom, and people kind of fall out of the entire food chain of the human species, so much the better. It's their entire concept of social Darwinism. Okay. Now, so that we've covered a lot of these matters in the course up to this point in time, and I want you to be at least adequately familiar with these concepts, because those of you who have years remaining for your educational process, whether it be more years as undergraduates or in graduate school, I would strongly recommend that you pursue these issues that we have raised in this class so that you can become fluent in these concepts and understand how it is that you can mount an argument that is other than just a simple utilitarian argument, that you're making a certain public policy recommendation simply because it generates the greatest good for the greatest number. Because you need to understand that once the robber barons and the mercantilists can establish nation-state boundaries, then at most they're talking about policies that generate the greatest good for the greatest number of people who are citizens of that particular nation-state. And they're perfectly willing to foist the costs of that onto other people outside of the boundaries of their nation-state. That's why you get all of this discussion about building walls around the country and excluding, people who are really upset about our having invaded the oil fields of the Middle East, and they're really pissed off about this, and that they're willing to actually go so far as to blow things up. If we insist upon holding on to that territory and putting authoritarian governments into power, one after another, by hand-picking who they are, and they come into power and suppress the majority of people inside their boundaries. We don't need to tolerate that. We don't need to tolerate that. But you have to be willing from this point forward, upon moving out from this class into the world, you have to be willing to talk about this. You have to be willing to talk about this with your parents, with your families, with other fellow students, with people with whom you work or study further at the graduate school level, and the faculty members that you're going to be encountering. You have to dare to step forward to talk about these subjects. You have to put the questions to them. You have to not tolerate their bullshit answers that they give to you. You have to insist upon having a genuine educational experience, because you can only get it if you demand it. Okay? We were quite fortunate during my undergraduate years and graduate school years of kind of being buoyed up by a long-term mobilization to resist the war in Vietnam, and so that we were, as a generation, willing to put the tough questions to the faculty. There was I should tell you a couple funny stories. In my very first year at Harvard Law School, I'd come up from the undergraduate school, and one of my Kirkland House classmates at the undergraduate school, John Sheehan, told us, when he went up to Harvard Law School, and he told us about this practice that one of our professors had, the professor who taught property law, okay, in trusts, in the estate planning for rich people. That he taught this course. His name was W. Barton Leach, and he was the co-author of the major text on property law that was used in almost all the law schools of the country. We happen to be fortunate enough to have the guy himself, and his mentor, Bull Warren, is the guy that they based the character on in The Paper Chase. If any of you have seen that. But the bottom line is what W. Barton Leach used to do. He used to hate the fact that women were in the law school. He thought that this was a terrible waste of a position, that the women are going to go into a law firm, and within 2 or 3 years they're going to marry one of the partners, and they're going to have babies, and they're never going to practice law again, and they just wasted a whole... That was part of a long list of other things that he believed. And so what he would do is, in the very first class, he would post on the bulletin board out in the hall, Langdale Hall, he would post a reading assignment that he would not tell anybody, but he just put it there. And it was a reading assignment that you had to read this hypothetical that was between two farmers that lived next door to each other, Farmer A and Farmer B. And they lived very cordially for 25 years next door to each other. And then Farmer A died. And it turns out that when Farmer A's children had the property surveyed, because they were getting ready to sell it, they discovered that in fact Farmer B had accidentally built his fence 10 yards over into the property of Farmer A. And that this had gone on for 25 years, that the property, he thought it was his, that Farmer A thought it was his, he plowed the land, he fertilized the land, he used it for crops, etc. And so the question arose is that the children of Farmer A said that they wanted him to give the land back. In fact, sued him to make him give the land back. And so the question was, who is it that is entitled to have the land? Is it the one whose title resided in the land? Or was it the one who had cared for the land, nurtured the land, fertilized the land, and taken care of it all this time? And what W. Barton Leach was hoping is that the people who had lived through a grinding undergraduate career to earn their way into Harvard Law School would in fact be believing believing the story that really what you're trying to get trained to do at law school, at law school, is to argue both sides of the issue with equal fervor. And so that they were hoping, he was hoping that someone would, if he called upon them, the first thing he was hoping is that they wouldn't have seen the assignment. So that they would come into the class and be terrified when they learned that they had an assignment that they had missed. Because these people are such completely compulsive double A types, with the exception of present company, that they in fact would be terrified that their worst nightmare had come true. They find themselves sitting in a Harvard Law School class not having done the assignment, which was second worst only to being there with no clothes on, and they're a nightmare. And so the bottom line is that he would hope that they wouldn't have read the assignment, and so that he could then terrify them all. And then the second best thing he'd be looking for is someone who had read the case, and that they would start talking about how, well, on the one hand, there are these arguments to be made on behalf of Farmer A, and on the other side, there are these arguments that could be made on behalf of Farmer B. That's what he was hoping would happen. And it turns out, in the year before I went up to the law school, in the fall of '67, the year earlier, in the fall of '66, John Leshy was in the class, and Pappy Leach says, he gets up and says, well, I assume you've all read the assignment that was on the board. And about a quarter of the class kind of curls up into a fetal position in terror. And then what he would do is he would call on one of those people, hoping that they would then acknowledge they hadn't read it, and he would refuse to call upon that person for the entire remainder of the year. Then he would look around for someone who hadn't been cringing in terror, assuming that they'd read it, until he would say, okay, Emily, what do you think the answer to this is? Right? He'd pick somebody down in front, usually a woman. And so this woman in John Leshy's class immediately thrust her face into her notes, and she starts reading, saying, well, on the one hand, there are these arguments on behalf of Farmer A, and on the other hand, these arguments, she starts elucidating these arguments. And Pappy Leach slowly pulls the drawer, opens the drawer, and pulls out a bed sheet and walks down off the podium like this, where she's still got her nose and all of this stuff, and he throws the bed sheet over her like this. He says, this woman is dead. He said, I asked the question as to whose property it is. I didn't ask for the argument on each side. He said, you guys have probably heard all this myth that you have to argue both sides. No, he says, you have to argue the position of the client that pays you, he said. So fortunately, I had warning of this. So when I went up to the law school the next year, in the graduating with the last all-male class at Harvard University in 1967, I go up to the law school, and sure enough, he did the same thing, and he just gets up in front of everybody and he says, okay, now you've all read the assignment, whose property is this? And he looked around like that, and I'd been assigned to one of the front rows, and so he said, Mr. Sheehan. And fortunately, I had written my undergraduate honors thesis at Harvard College on constitutional law, and so I learned how to use the law library, and so I knew it, so I found the assignment, and I read it, I looked down in the footnotes, and I actually found it. So I just looked up at him, and I said, it is Farmer B. And that was it. And he just sat there and sat there and sat there, hoping that I would say more, unresponsive to his single question. But I didn't. And so then he said, "Oh, really?" He said, and why is that exactly? And so I said to him, I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, this turned out to be a real case. This was the case that was decided by the King's Bench back in 1689. And the farmer A children brought a lawsuit against farmer B, and the High Court, the King's Court, actually ruled on behalf of farmer A and the children. Said, but the fact is, it caused such a storm because it upset everybody's assumptions as to who had the property, because they all were taking care of it, etc., that they passed a statute, the statute on adverse possession, which asserts that if any piece of property is publicly appears to be owned by a given person for 21 years, and they care for it and tend to it, etc., that they are the owners of that land if it's been unobjected to. So I sold him that, and he just stood there, and he said, "Well," he said, "I guess somebody's been doing their homework around here." And I said, "Yes." I said, because we're here seriously. There's terrible things going on in the country. We're here to learn about the law so that we can help people, because there's so much stuff going on, including the war and all this stuff that's going on. And he was kind of taken aback like that. And then sitting way up in the back of the room, and they have the seats there, they go up at this kind of steep angle, right, for the kind of discussion in law school. And all of a sudden this fellow stands up in the back, Ron Brown, stands up, big blowed, afro hair and a big dashiki, and he says, "Not only that," he said, "we don't want to have to waste our time learning how to lay claim to some fucking wild animals either," he said, which is part of one of the things they study in property law. And he said, "Here, you had us read the assignment, read this," he says, and he throws down from way up in the back of the room a copy of Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice. Right? And it goes bang, and it lands on the floor there, right? And so we were all waiting to see whether Happy Leach was going to kind of submit to the whole pressure and go get it. And he did. And he turns around and he goes out and he picks up the book like this, right? And so we had him, from that point on. And our whole class at law school went through 3 straight years of just kicking the crap out of the faculty and demanding that they answer our questions and help train us on how to use the law, not for some big fat ass corporations. They would boo the professors and stuff when they would talk about the rules in corporation law that that as a member of the board of directors you cannot in fact do anything on behalf of the public interest. That there's a doctrine in corporate law called ultra vires, that you're acting beyond the limit of the scope of your authority as a board of directors. You can only do things that are designed to generate the short-term profit, to increase the royalties that are going to the shareholders. And so we must have been booing. In fact, what happened that following weekend, we had classes 6 days a week at Harvard Law School, and so we had classes on Saturday. In our Saturday morning class, he comes into our class. We had him on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. And so on Friday's class, he said, "Look, I should tell you, we have a special guest that is going to be coming to talk with you." He said that this was a really interesting first class that we had here. He said, "I know that you all were very upset about what happened in the first class." He said, he was upset. We weren't upset. He said, "I know you're all very upset about this." He said, "But I've invited a very special guest for our Saturday morning class." He said, "And in fact, we have to have it at Lowell Hall because I've invited the other 3 sections of your class to come." So we all go there on Saturday morning. So we're all sitting there in class, and he gets up on stage and he says, "Okay, here's the special guest," and out comes United States Supreme Court Justice John Harlan, and he comes with his seeing eye clerk, leads him out onto the stage and turns and points him at us, and he squints up and he looks and says, "Well, gentlemen," he says, ignoring the entire 10% of the women that were in the class. "Well, gentlemen," he says, Professor says that there's something mighty peculiar about this class." And he said, "Here." He says, "So I've just come here to tell you," he says, that he thinks it may have something to do with this war," he said. But I've come here to tell you today that wars will come and wars will go, but your profession shall endure. He said, and then Guy Blinn, I shouldn't tell who it is, you can cancel that part of it. But one of the guys in our class hollers out and says, "Fuck you!" And John Harlan goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" And after a couple minutes, another guy goes, "Kiss my ass!" Comes out of the thing. Whoa! And the people started rolling up, tearing out papers out of their Harvard notebook and throwing them at him. And so all of a sudden there was a shower of these paper wads falling all around the justice of the Supreme Court, and they had to have a seeing eye clerk lead him off the stage. Okay? So that's how we started law school. Okay? And what I'm saying to you is that in that particular case, there was a lot to be said about the fact that it was because everybody was so upset over the fact that people were being drafted and threatened with being put in prison for 20 years in federal prison if you didn't go 8,000 miles away and try to shoot hot lead into the bodies of people who'd lived there for 1,000 generations, right? And some kind of fabricated construct had been generated by the ruling class that somehow we were supposed to be going over there doing this. And so that what I'm saying is that you haven't been confronted yet with the same degree of intense disruption of your lives yet by the global climate change. But you will be. You will be. And you have the opportunity still here, while being an undergraduate, and still have your graduate school training ahead of you, to focus on this issue. And it's not just the issue of global climate change. While that is, in fact, the fulcrum of this particular manifestation of the problem right now, you now know that the deeper underlying cause of the problem is this issue of transnational corporate capitalism. That, in fact, the structure of this corporation that has been generated by those set of judicial decisions after the American Civil War, immunizing the de facto owners of all of the assets and profits from the corporation, immunizing them against any personal liability, and immunizing the board of directors from any liability, in immunizing the management of the corporation from any personal liability, rendering liable only the assets of that individual corporation, which their lawyers are very busily going about limiting to the greatest possible degree at any given moment, so that they have minimal exposure to liability. And so that they'll do things like, Ralph Nader revealed with regard to the Chevrolet, the little Chevrolet car that had a little engine in the back and stuff, that you bump into the back of it, it catches on fire and burns everybody alive in it. And the lawyers were actually making computations about how many people are likely to get burnt up by this Corvair, and how many of them are going to sue you, actually, and how many of them can you defeat by just papering them to death because they aren't going to have lawyers, they can't afford the lawyers, and therefore that's cheaper for us than to redesign the car. You know? And even though you expose that publicly like that, the way the entire legal system is set up, with all the rules and regulations, and they're trained lawyers who are trained to argue, in fact, either side of the issue, or to, as Pappy Leach said, to make the argument of the person who has paid you the money to argue it. Okay? And what I'm suggesting is that what I want is one of the consequences of this course is I want you to, above all, not to be aimless relativists. That you will not just, in fact, say, well, you know, since we don't have absolute answers to these definitive cosmic questions, we don't really know for an absolute certainty what the cosmic right and wrong is in any given situation. So why don't we do the things the most practical? Why don't we go along with everybody else? Why don't we just kind of keep our head down and figure out how to get right on the crest of that wave and make as much money as we can here under the present system and be as comfortable as we can. And maybe we can shelter Or maybe you can shelter your children, in a gated community, perhaps. And maybe you can hire Blackwater to provide guards for your gated community. And if in fact your gated community ends up going underwater, you can move somewhere else. But the fact of the matter is that your children and your children's children are not going to be able to survive this oncoming onslaught unless you and the other people in your generation whom you're able to persuade join forces with our generation and those of us whom we've been able to persuade to participate in this process, to do everything that you can under kind of an emergency situation to allay the worst possible consequences of what's happened so far. But I'm pointing out to you that we need to confront who the people are that you're really dealing with, and you'll remember the story. Always remember the story of Joseph Burkholder Smith that I told you about. When he sat there and said, if you're going to be doing a case like this, I want to make sure that you know who you're really dealing with. And who we're really dealing with are the fascists. The fascists who in fact believe that the wedding of the power of the central government with corporations, subsidizing the research and development costs of the corporations, and allowing the stockholders to keep all the profits and to have them making money at war machinery, which is being used in turn by the government to lay claim to foreign sources of resources for those corporations. When you see in the second iteration of the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document, which I provided for you in the reading, when you see them specifically talking about the objective of a new alliance is to maintain the continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials needed by members of the northern industrial states. And you see the list of the northern industrial states to include all of the major Caucasian nations in the northern hemisphere. You ought to know what's happening. This is the same thing that we were faced with in the raw in the Third Reich in Germany. And as you now know from this course, was funded specifically by the private investment clients of Brown Brothers Harriman, the legal clients of Sullivan and Cromwell, and the investors in the Union Bank of New York, and their subsidiary, the Bank of Shipping and Commerce in the Netherlands. You know that now, okay? And so what you have to do is you have to allow that to sink in. Because in my opinion, the information that you've been given in this course isn't like information that you've gotten in a lot of other courses. About who were the people on the Nino and Pinto and the Santa Maria, what did you learn about the crash of 29 in the stock market? That what you've been told now is what the story is behind the scenes. And I've been privileged enough to, over the past 45 years, be involved in a number of cases where I have come face to face with these people. We've presented the evidence to the people and to the institutions, and the institutions have recoiled in the face of this information and have refused to do anything about this because they, in fact, are beneficiaries of the services of these financial circles. That there is a partnership that has been established, and they've received the basic sinew of the American state as an imperial power in the world that is able to provide the kind of resources for you and for your sisters and brothers and family members that they're able to provide these types of advantages to you. And they therefore are betting that you won't do anything about it. Okay? And I'm just hoping that we have been adequately effective in the 20 meetings that we've had together, in the discussions we've had so far, to get you to understand that if you stand by and allow this to continue, that you and I and all the members of our generation are going to be responsible for the pain and suffering that is inflicted upon millions of people, as the years unfold. It's imposing some of this damage on the people right now as we speak, okay? And that, that it's going to continue to do that. The island states are basically going underwater right now. I'm intending to meet with people from the Philippines and get the Philippines state legislature or national legislature to agree to mount a Uniting for Peace resolution in the United Nations General Assembly to challenge the United States and China and India to charge them with knowingly damaging the national security of those island states that are members of the United Nations. That is just as devastating as flying over them and dropping bombs on them. And they're just as knowledgeable about what it is that they're doing. Okay? And so that I'm hoping that they can get 2/3 of the members of the General Assembly to support the bringing up of this issue under the Uniting for Peace resolution, which, as I may have mentioned to you in passing, that Henry Kissinger revealed to us in Gov 182 in my undergraduate years at Harvard College, and just said to us, if the people of the world ever come to really know about this Uniting for Peace resolution, we're in real trouble. Which reminds you of the old story of the Lone Ranger and Tonto. When they're surrounded by Native American people shooting arrows at them, and the Lone Ranger turns to Tonto and says, "It looks like this is the end for us, Tonto." And he said, "What do you mean, us, white man?" So the question is, who is the us? Who is the us and who is the them? And we have to be careful now, because I'm not trying to recruit you into being second paradigm dialecticians, where you're going to say, there's these ultimate bad guys. There's these ultimate bad guys. We're the ultimate good guys. And therefore, anything that we need to do to get rid of them, to vanquish them, is okay. Because the only moral referent is the dialectic and the vanquishing of the ultimate other. I do not want you to fall prey to that type of a temptation. And I can tell you, it's a very real temptation. When we were working on the Iran-Contra case and revealing to people, classrooms full of people, 5,000 people at a time, 200,000 people at a time. Sarah Nelson, our executive director, is standing in front of Battery Park with 200,000 people in the audience, telling them about Kerr-McGee and the smuggling of plutonium to Israel and Iran, etc. The bottom line is that we're not that if you motivate people by appealing to the lower angels of our nature, the kind of second chakra dialectical energy in our human body, you can get people to jump up out of their seats and go to the doors and start tearing the doorknobs off to get outside to strangle these people. Okay? But that isn't going to cure our problem. That isn't going to cure our problem. What we have to do is try to understand that there are options that exist moving further to the left on the political spectrum. And you can move all the way to the 6th and 7th paradigm worldviews, which offer all types of moral ethical systems, that Plato talks about and Aristotle talks about, and the various prophets talk about, so that you have options. And that even if you think that the type of choice that you make of which option you're going to exercise has a lot of the characteristics of kind of an existential choice, the fact is that you should pick one of these worldviews, become familiar with it, and do not buy into the postmodern argument that in fact there are no reference for right and wrong. And so therefore, that you need to, as a responsible academician, spend your time talking everybody in your student body out of believing in any kind of moral standards. You know, that is not a legitimate undertaking, in my opinion. It is the foregoing of one's responsibility as a teacher and as a professor. That I believe that one can fairly point out the range of options that people have and leave people the free will to choose which one you want to engage in. And I'm not the least bit embarrassed about advocating that you consider the 5th, 6th, and 7th paradigmatic worldviews as distinct from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. You know? And you're always safe in going into the 4th paradigm, scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview, which the basic academy tends to teach, you know, short of the postmodernists that are in now even suggesting that the 4th paradigm, scientific, logical, positivist worldview is not legitimate because the material world is not real. You know, citing quantum physics in the theory. But you will remember that in the field of quantum studies, Max Planck and the others that were doing the experiments between 1923 and 1926, what they discovered is that if in fact you collide together the protons in an atom, and you break them into smaller and smaller parts, you break them down ultimately into the smallest parts, and you fire these smaller particles at each other in a cyclotron. When they collide, they will ultimately break down into smaller and smaller parts. And if you take the smallest of them and you project them out in a way, and you split them in half, and they split and they go off in opposite directions, you need to remember that if in fact you direct force to one of them moving away from the other, you apply force to one of them, the other one will move as well. Okay, that's just one of the basic insights into the experiment. And very importantly, and I think more importantly, when you realize that the ultimately reducible integer of matter is an inchoate quantum field, when you break down the last ultimate muon or lepton into its smaller and smaller constituent parts, you ultimately have these inchoate quantum fields. And the inchoate quantum fields, as I mentioned to you one time before, they blink up into material manifestation as either a particle of mass or a wave of energy, and then they blink back out of material manifestation. They actually reside in an inchoate state of a non-material manifestation. And then they re-manifest as a material manifestation, either as a wave of energy or a particle of mass, and it's in a completely random sequence that no one can predict how they're going to manifest as a particle of mass or a wave of energy, unless you direct human intention to an inchoate quantum field. And that they have studied over and over again, and it's the most puzzling feature of quantum physics, is that if you direct human intention to an inchoate quantum field, willing it to manifest as a particle of mass or a wave of energy, it will in fact so manifest to a statistically significant extent. Okay? And so that this is an ultimate insight that causes me to feel free to recommend to you that you take a look at these 5th, 6th, and 7th paradigm worldviews that are rooted in a fundamental assumption that there is a relationship between the directed intention of our human family and the actual form in which material reality manifests itself. So that's just in short. And you know that I assume that my observation of that in one of the earlier courses caused one of the students to say that they thought that I was being too religious. It's religious only in the extent of the Latin root of religion being religare, which has to do with relinking. Of relinking our sense of alienated self that has been the sub-function of the evolution of the intellect in our human species, somewhere between Australopithecus and Homo erectus, the evolution of the complexification of our brains that have caused us to develop the intellect, the Latin root of which is intellectus, which is the ability to distinguish the difference between. And that has enabled us to distinguish the difference between ourself and you and you and you, and to be able to figure out relationships that enable us to drop back and take a position outside of reality and manipulate reality. And that is our intellect. It's an extraordinarily valuable and important faculty. But the flip side of the experience of the intellect is a sense of ourself as experientially separate and apart from all the rest of reality. And that fundamental underlying state of separateness is the source of anxiety that people have. And the questing after more and more power to exert more and more dominion over other aspects of reality doesn't satiate that anxiety. But that isn't known by people on the right side of the spectrum. They keep believing that if they can assert more and more power and dominion over more and more of the external world, that they can in fact somehow alleviate that gnawing anxiety of separateness. Okay? And that doesn't work. And so that this idea of understanding the unitive phenomenon in the universe and opening oneself to access to that unitive phenomenon, and from that experience of unity, being able to understand the balance among all of the apparently disparate parts of reality, what their relationship is to each other, what the algorithms are of relationship, and what your relationship is to them, and understanding that you can, as human beings, you can exert your intention onto reality, because reality, every microsecond, flashes out of existence and back into existence. And so you can affect the very next incarnation of objective reality by the direction of your human intention. Okay? And so this is a secret resource that we have at our disposal as human beings. And if you understand that, and you bring this to bear as part of the resources that we utilize to change the future, and to change the future in accordance with a certain set of normative principles that are discerned by existing in a state of unity with all of being. You can in fact experientially discern what is harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of the universe. And this is natural law, and this is what underlies the entire United States Constitution, the founding of the Constitution, the assertion that there are fundamental rights that abide beyond legislation, independent of legislation, independent of Supreme Court rulings. And so that is your guide, that is your reference. And so that I want to thank you all for having taken the course. Thank you all for the kind of attention you've paid up to this point in it. And what I want to do is I want us to go to our last discussion. It sounds kind of fatal, but it's just our last discussion together before you get to doing your theses. And we'll go over to Porter, and but I want you to think about. People keep saying to me, you should write out questions and assign people to think of questions to ask. But I want you to think of questions, because you must have questions. If you assume, at least hypothetically, that you're never going to get to talk to me again, which may please some of you, but I don't think so. But if you've got questions that you'd like to ask that have to do with the materials of the course, please think of them so we can have this discussion today. Okay? Terrific. Okay, let's go over next door. And,